Hi everyone, it's John from RFM Calc, and today, as part of our series taking a deep dive into the different reports that you get with RFM Calc, we're looking at our revenue by location reports. So, as you can see here in this little comparison of all the different account plans, like the majority of our report types, revenue by location is included, even on our free plan, all the way up to our huge plan. A little summary here that you can click shows that it reports on revenue by location, basically with an interactive map, and gives you a visualization of sales by country and also sales by state, region or province within each country you sell to. So the first question I always like to answer on these videos is, why did we include this report? So revenue by location wasn't actually in the early releases of RFM Calc. We tried to focus more on reports for data that you can't get from other systems. So revenue by location, obviously you can get, quite a few e-commerce platforms will have some form of revenue by location report. And then Google Analytics as well, as I'm sure you're aware, and other analytics platforms will put revenue by location fairly front and center in terms of something you can access. So the reason we added it was for a couple of reasons. Firstly, a couple of our users asked for it. I think there's varying reasons for that. I think one of the reasons is certainly the data you get from Google Analytics isn't particularly accurate. So typically Google Analytics will base revenue by location on your IP address in terms of where it assigns your location. So at a country level, that's reasonably accurate. I say reasonably, it should be kind of 98, 99% accurate. But when you're breaking that down then by state or province, it really drops to kind of 50% accurate in terms of where a customer is actually located. And that's just the nature of how IP address blocks work and where they're assigned in a location. Obviously, your ISP who powers your internet connection probably isn't based necessarily in the same city as you or region as you. I think the other thing is that typically Google Analytics included and e-commerce platforms don't present this data in a particularly nice way, and obviously our users know that we present reports and data in a really nice, easy to digest format, and so they wanted to see this data in that format. And I think as well, this is quite a nice one that if you're working within an e-commerce business or you're managing an e-commerce business from an agency perspective, this is quite a nice report that kind of C-level people like to see. You know, pretty map showing revenue by by location is normally quite high on the agenda in terms of something that's you know, your clients or your bosses will want to see. So a combination of all those factors really was the driving force. I think the other key reason is that we obviously work with Google Charts, who provide who power basically all the visual charts that you see on our reports, and they natively support revenue by location charts based on a visual map and also by region as well. So country and region free of charge as part of the Google Charts suite that you can hook into. So it made a lot of sense, I think, to kind of build this in, even though it's maybe not the level of insight that the other reports that we give you offer. It's still a kind of nice, pretty report, and it can give you some useful information. So now that we understand why we've added it, I also wanted to talk just about how it works and how we get that data from your e-commerce platform. Okay, so when you schedule any report with RFM Calc on any of our plans, you get the option to map a couple of columns for country and region. So if I just go to my project here, Shopify is a good example for this, which I'll explain why in a second, and my standard column mappings. So you can save these obviously against your project, but then you can change them for every report you schedule as well. So there's two columns that you can map. You've got country column and region. Now, if I just click this little help icon here, this will give you a good amount of insight on what we actually need. So in terms of what we look for, we follow the ISO 3166 standards, which is basically the standard definition for codes and country names that's kind of accepted worldwide. So the ISO 3166 standard is a little bit confusing. So I've got their official website open here, which obviously you can Google and have a look at. Fundamentally, there's kind of three key parts really. So first of all, there's a country code, which you can see the detailed here. Now, confusingly, this can be represented by 2 letters, and it can also be represented by 3 letters. So by default, we will look for 2 letters, and Shopify, for example, uses a 2-letter ISO 3166 code. But if your platform does use the 3-letter code for the country, we will then convert that into 2 letters on our end to allow us to process the report. So we do support both Alpha 2 and Alpha 3 country codes. So that's the first thing. Once you've got the country code, we can then check if we can process the region. So if you don't set a country, or if we can't match that country against either the 2-digit, 3-digit, or the official English country name, then we'll ignore it in terms of the revenue by location reports. But if we can, we'll then check the region for you as well. So for Shopify, it's billing province is the column name that I've assigned. Obviously, that will vary depending on your e-commerce platform. So that then gets even more complicated because there's a lot of different codes. And basically, to cut a long story short, we've collated a number of ISO 3166 region codes for all the countries we support from various different sources. So we've probably got around about 5,000 that we check against, that we can then use to pass to the reports to generate the visual region sales by region map as well. So it's fairly it's fairly convoluted. I'm sure the people at ISO do their best, but it's not the most uniform standard. And like I say, different e-commerce platforms will present this data in different ways. Some will use the Alpha 2. Some, I think by default, although Magento doesn't export a country by default, internally it uses the Alpha 3 to store it, which is obviously different to Shopify. And then some e-commerce platforms will pass the full country name. And there are definitely some quirks. So one of my favorites is the United Kingdom. So the 2-digit code for the United Kingdom is GB. The 3-digit code is GBR, but the official English language name is United Kingdom, not Great Britain. So there's a few quirks like that. So as well as mapping 3 digits against 2, we do also look for kind of common misspellings. So I say misspellings, but if your e-commerce platform, for example, passed through the country as Great Britain, we will pick that up and convert that to United Kingdom for you, so it works. So we've got a few of those in as well. Obviously, if your e-commerce platform does something in a particular way, feel free to let us know, and we're happy to kind of add a conversion for you to help with that. We don't support 4-letter codes because no one really uses those anymore, fingers crossed, unless you have a very old e-commerce platform, in which case I'm very sorry, but it's just 2 and 3. I think the other thing just to mention as well on ISO codes is they do quite often change. So if I just open this link here, you can see there's basically a committee, and they have meetings and they make releases and updates to the standard. And you can see the latest one was in March 2022. Which was kind of 3 months before I'm recording this video in June. So you can imagine, yes, this standard will change and this will probably be updated on the official ISO website, but your e-commerce platform is probably not going to update at the same time. It may never update, it may update a year later. So it's very, very difficult to kind of keep everything in sync. So even if we updated on our end to support these ISO codes, the chances are your e-commerce platform may be using an old code or not the right code. So it's a tricky one for us to keep updated. We try, but we can't guarantee that every kind of code you pass through for your e-commerce platform is going to map correctly to the region you expect. Countries should be pretty solid. They don't change as often. So you should be pretty safe with country codes. But obviously when you get into thousands and thousands of regions within those countries, it's a lot more difficult to keep updated. Cool. So with that being said, assuming you've correctly mapped your country and region columns when you generate your report, that will all then pass through. We'll store that against the order when we generate the report, and we'll also, just to mention, we'll store that in your full customer CSV as well. So when you download a list of customers, assuming you're on one of our paid account plans, that will have the country and region of the customer based on their last order. If they place multiple orders as well, and it changes on the different orders based on their most recent order, you'll get that in the customer CSV as well. So without further ado, now we understand how it works, let's actually have a look at the report. Okay, so the example report I've gone for today is a Shopify report. So I think Shopify, out of all the e-commerce platforms we work with. Obviously, we work with any e-commerce platform. We're completely platform agnostic in terms of what we support. But Shopify does support country codes and so on pretty well in terms of country and region. It's pretty up to date with the ISO standards, and it passes it through natively as separate columns which we can interpret. So you can see here this is quite a sizable Shopify store. Obviously, I've anonymized all the data for the purposes of this. So we've got about over 200,000 order rows here. So if I go down to revenue by location, you can just click here. The first thing we've got is revenue by country. So we've got this nice visual map here, and you can just hover over and you can see this site's obviously in US dollars. We support all currencies, so it doesn't have to be in US dollars, but you can see just hovering over by country, we can see exactly the revenue from each country. So obviously this is a US dominated site, so big chunk of the revenue is from there, but you've got Canada, you've got all the South American countries, you've got UK as well, decent chunk Australia. I think it's the second biggest country for this particular website. So you can see you've got a nice visual map there showing that. We've then also got a nice pie chart. Just there, you can see there your biggest countries. Obviously, you've got a lot of countries in there, but you can see nice and easily a nice pie chart. And then we've also got that data in a data table, so in terms of your revenue by location. And again, this is better than trying to use Google Analytics because this is actually based on where the customer is purchasing from. So you can see, as you remember, we mapped for this project the billing country and billing province. You could also do this by shipping or any address field you want, but it'll give you an accurate picture. The customer's billing address is where they're based rather than necessarily their IP address. And again, in this modern world, the customer could be placing orders from anywhere in the world. They could be away. They could be working in a different country. But really, the location that's relevant to you is probably their billing address. Is what you want to report on, and that's what we capture here. So we've got a big list of obviously all the countries here, all the way down. You can see that like most of our data tables, we limit to 100 rows. So there's 137 different countries that this site sells to, but we've limited to 100 rows, which is fine. We also plot, which is quite popular, and again, something you can't easily see in other platforms, monthly revenue by country. So you've got a nice kind of bar chart here that you can hover over and obviously see. The US dominates every month, but then in certain seasons, you can see November 2020 for this site. Australia was a bigger chunk, and November, so November each year. This particular site, obviously, I'm not going to disclose anything about them in terms of what they sell, but you can see that in November they have a big spike in terms of the proportion of orders coming from Australia, proportion of revenue, which is interesting to know, certainly. And as with all charts, we split into 24-month segments. So if you've got more than 24 months worth of data, then it'll split into multiple charts, as you can see here. Then, once you've got sales by country, we also break it down further into revenue by region. So every country that you sell to will basically have a section revenue by region. If I just scroll down, I'll scroll back up in a second, but you can see you've got these dots here, and that basically represents every country where you have valid regions that we've been able to pick out. So obviously we start with the biggest revenue first, which is for this site, the United States. And you can see, we could hover over it state by state and see the revenue, which again is quite a nice visual interactive thing that C-level people like to see. So you can see here, I can hover over, obviously California is a dominating state for this business, but you can see Texas, Florida, New York, and so on, Illinois as well. A darker indicating more revenue, and every state basically has sales, as you can see, even Alaska. Which is pretty promising, and Connecticut and so on, Rhode Island. So you can really see it in a visual way. Again, similar to the revenue by country, you can see a breakdown here by state as well. And then you've got the data table, again, showing all the states. And then you've also got this, again, sales by month, by region within each country. So sales every month split down by the different regions, in this case, US states. And the great thing about this section of the report is that's obviously for the US. You get this for every single country. So every single country that you sell to, we do a separate breakdown by region. Now, obviously, to do this consecutively below each other on the report would make the report absolutely massive. So what we do on this section and certain other sections of the report is basically give you a little kind of slider. So if I click right here, I get to Australia, where you've got, again, sales by state. So we can see New South Wales is the dominant state. In Australia for this website, again, you've got the overall pie chart. Again, you've got the table, and then you've got monthly sales as well. And you can see, as we picked out before, in November, you've got this big spike in Australian sales for this site. And then you can break that down, as you can see, really easily by the state within Australia. And basically, you could do that for every country, which is really neat. So you've got Canada and United Kingdom. So United Kingdom's interesting in terms of how Google Charts presents this data. So the support for region maps does vary by country. So you can see US, Australia, it works pretty well. United Kingdom's different in that it doesn't actually support counties, which is more akin to states in the US. It's just split down by the countries within the United Kingdom. So we've got England, which is obviously the dominant for this, but then you've got Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales generating sales. Now, Shopify follows that convention, so Shopify passes through the region as England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland because it's following that standard rather than using a county. So that's handy, but that fits then into this report. But you can see it varies based on basically what Google Charts supports. So some countries, the coverage in terms of what you can visualize region by region is better than others. So certainly for the United States and Australia and so on, it's much more what you'd expect versus the UK. Whereas if you're in the UK, you'd probably expect sales by county, but it doesn't. Google Charts doesn't support that, and Shopify kind of follows that trend in terms of how it exports the data. Oh, cool. So hopefully that gives you a nice overview there. You can see it's obviously really detailed. It gives you a lot of detail, right down to kind of monthly revenue as well. And like I say, you can just flick through all your countries. So it's really kind of gives you a lot of depth as well in terms of breaking it down by the region as well. One question you might be asking, if you're kind of familiar with Google Charts, is why do we stop at the region level? Why don't we support the city level? So there's a couple of reasons for that. The main one is that Google Charts basically supports these maps free. So sales by country and by region. Google Charts it offers those free. There's no kind of additional charge. We don't have to charge you extra. It's part of their free suite of charts they generate. So that's the main reason. The second reason is to do revenue by city, for example. That's because that's a level down. Google Charts requires you to add an API key for Google Maps, which then geocodes the city location to coordinates, which you can then plot on a visual map like this. So the issue with that is that it's not free. So you do have to pay for geocoding within Google Maps, and you can see the price here. So it's $5 per 1,000, or if you go over 100,000, $4. Now this is done on every load of the report. So firstly, it would obviously make the report a lot slower. But secondly, if you accidentally select the wrong column, say instead of selecting city, you select order number, which is a unique column, and then you update and you upload 1 million rows, which is pretty typical for our customers, you would then be charged $4,000 every time you loaded the report by Google. So even if you gave us your API key and set that up accordingly, if you make one wrong column selection, it's going to cost you a significant sum every time you load the report, as well as making the report horrendously slow. It would take hours to load. As you can see, there's a 50 requests per second kind of rate limit. So all in all, we kind of thought about that and thought, actually, that's probably not worth the hassle for you as our customers, but also for us when you accidentally select the wrong column and get billed thousands of dollars. We don't need that grief, basically. So that, in short, is why we just support countries and regions. But I think it works really well, and I think it gives a lot of detail in terms of what you can present to people in the business. Like I say, this isn't the kind of key data insights that are necessarily going to change how you position your business or your targeting necessarily, but it's still kind of quite nice to look at from a visual point of view. Great. So the final thing I wanted to say on these reports was just to express a little note of caution. So as you might be aware, at RFM Calc, we've got a lot of e-commerce experience across multiple businesses. That's what's allowed us to kind of generate such a good system with such useful information. Because we know what information is key to kind of drive business growth. So one thing, as I say, this isn't kind of the same as a lot of the other reports in terms of the insight it gives you. But still, you might be tempted to look at this and think, okay, so we get a lot of sales in a particular country or a particular region is probably a better example. Therefore, we should target that region. Now, I've seen this a lot. I've seen a lot of kind of business owners make this kind of call when they see data like this. So this is really just to finish a little note of caution. So XKCD did this many years ago that I've referenced before, and you can see it's basically a heat map of where our site's users are, but then subscribers to Martha Stewart Living and consumers of furry pornography. And you can see each heat map is exactly the same. And what that is basically indicating is that obviously if there are regions with higher population in the country you're looking at, then naturally you would expect more sales from there. And then it becomes very difficult then to say, okay, can we match the population on RFM Calc? And it's kind of way beyond what we would need to do or want to do for a few reasons. So it's hard enough just maintaining, as I mentioned before, the ISO country codes to try and maintain population figures, and not just population figures. You'd really need to look at median income as well, because obviously some regions may have naturally higher median incomes than others, and therefore likely to spend more, particularly if you're at the luxury end of the market. So to actually try and compile all that data and then work out where you over-index from a sales point of view is really difficult. And it's not something we want to get into. Like I say, this is not a core part of our... It's obviously a core report, but it's not kind of a key insight in terms of what we offer. And to be honest, to actually get anything, any real learnings out of that, you need to be generating hundreds and hundreds of millions of sales in a particular country a year to actually get to the level where you can say, okay, our sales over-index in a particular location, unless it's massive, unless there's a really huge reason for it. If you have maybe one retail store in the country and that's based in a particular location and you're including those figures in this data, then obviously that's going to make a huge difference. But yeah, I see business owners, certainly at a growth stage and an early stage, kind of make this mistake. So I've worked with a lot of businesses in the UK, and it's very much, oh yeah, most of our sales come from London, therefore we should target London. Well, yes, but that's the biggest city by far in the UK in terms of population and also median income. So naturally, you'd expect more sales from there. So you probably know that already, but that's just a little note of caution to finish on when you're looking at these reports. Great. So I think that's everything. I think we've covered quite a lot of detail. I hope that's been useful in terms of how our revenue by location reports work. They're very easy, as I say, as long as the data's accessible in your order CSV, whatever e-commerce platform you're using. Like I say, we try and be as flexible as we can in terms of the ISO formats we support, be it 2-digit country codes, 3-digit country codes, the full English recognised name of the country. Any of those will do. And that will allow us then to generate these reports, which, like I say, although they don't necessarily give you key business decision-making insights, they are still quite useful and often very popular with C-level people within a business in terms of something pretty to look at. Great. So I hope that's been useful. Thank you very much for watching. We'll be back soon with more videos around our key reports in a similar format to this. But obviously, if you've got any questions on this report or any of our other reports, feel free to drop us a line at any time. Thanks, everyone.